From now on, the three of us will live here. The house is large, so just the two of us would make you feel lonely. It's pitiful to leave my sister in a small apartment, and now is the perfect time for her to move. I hope you can support her job search." The moment the move was completed, my husband, acting all high and mighty, brought his younger sister Julia home. Just recently, my beloved grandfather passed away. Preparing for the funeral and sorting out his belongings, and above all, the sudden farewell to a loved one, had drained me both physically and emotionally. Since I inherited my grandfather's house as an heirloom, we decided to move there at my husband's suggestion. Finally, when the moving of belongings was completed, my husband brought Julia without consulting me. Such unreasonable behavior from my husband quickly cooled my feelings of love for him. My name is Lucy. I graduated from the local university's pharmacy department and am currently working as a pharmacist, entering my 5th year this year. My husband, a classmate, was introduced to me 2 years ago by a colleague at the hospital where I work. He works as a full-time employee at a supermarket and has a generous nature. He had broken up with his girlfriend from his student days and seemed to be heartbroken. I myself had a boyfriend only once in high school, but it did not last long. Both my husband and I have little experience in love, but that in fact gave us a sense of security. Our holidays rarely matched due to our different professions, but our relationship went smoothly, and we got married when he was promoted to chief at his workplace. After getting married, we started a new life in a convenient apartment in the city center. My parents died in an accident, and since high school, I have lived with my grandfather in his old house. The house, an old building, creaked every time you walked on the floor. However, my grandfather's chronic illness worsened 6 months ago, and his health deteriorated, leading to repeated hospitalizations, and he became hardly able to go outside. That house, filled with memories of my grandfather, is very precious to me, and even after moving, I regularly go back to clean it. My grandfather, fighting his illness, was very happy about my marriage and said strongly, "This motivates me to keep going." I promised to lead a happy life, keeping his words close to my heart. Fortunately, I was able to establish a good relationship with my husband's parents quickly, and although they live far away and we only meet a few times a year, they always say, "You are always welcome." The start of our married life was smooth, but there was one concern. It was about Julia. She is currently a first-year college student, a lively 19-year-old, living alone while attending a university near our apartment. She has moved away from her parents' home. The decision to choose this residence was mainly made by my husband, influenced by the fact that Julia would be attending a university in the city. The siblings have always been close, and Julia had expressed her desire to be near us. It's natural to get along well as a family. However, I immediately regretted not having more discussions with my husband, who had decided based solely on his sister's wishes. 3 days after moving, while I was trying to tidy up the remaining boxes on the weekend, my husband brought Julia over unexpectedly, catching me off guard. With no prior notice and me in casual clothes and no makeup, I couldn't just send her back, so I hurriedly made space and asked her to sit in the living room. Although we had met a few times during our courtship, those occasions were always pre-scheduled, and we met outside, so I was properly dressed. Feeling irritated with my husband, I decided to remain calm in front of Julia. "Congratulations on your marriage. Please take good care of my brother," said Julia, handing me a paper bag. Inside was baked goods from a famous Western confectionery store. "There's no need to be so formal. It would cost me a lot to return the favor," my husband said with an easy laugh, but I couldn't hide my agitation inside. Julia, with her lavish spending habits, owns expensive clothes and accessories that seem too mature for a student. I once asked my husband discreetly if she might be doing something improper, but whenever it comes to Julia, he changes his expression and says, "She wouldn't do such a thing, but I'll offer to help financially if she's in trouble." Julia certainly receives a monthly allowance from her parents. I've heard this directly from her mother and know the details of the amount, so I'm confident it's accurate. Despite receiving ample living expenses aside from tuition, she is now also receiving extra money from my husband. When I point out this excessive indulgence, my husband opposes it, and intense arguments arise between us. While I can understand his concern for Julia, I find it hard to accept him frequently buying her expensive bags and accessories, or cooking for her at her apartment. Other than that, he is a kind husband who takes the initiative in household chores, and I have no other complaints about him. The problem is Julia herself. She doesn't seem to think highly of me and has made condescending remarks. Having grown up in an environment where her parents and brother always catered to her, she probably sees me as an obstacle. I never thought someone like Lucy would become my brother's wife. He used to date only women who looked like models. Lucy seems rather plain by comparison. There's a difference between someone you love and someone you marry. I hope he doesn't cheat on you. Lucy, you have a good income as a pharmacist, right? Why don't you dress more fashionably? Weren't you introverted and focused only on your studies during your student days? These sarcastic comments were directed at me by Julia when my husband was not around. She is only 19 and still very immature, and dealing with her seriously is exhausting. I thought about complaining to my husband during her more persistent moments. But given his indulgent attitude toward her, the complications that would arise are not hard to imagine. Since the sarcasm remained verbal, I did not tell anyone about it. Knowing we would have a long-term relationship, I decided it might be counterproductive to rush into getting along, so I chose to build the relationship slowly. Julia, who had just recently arrived, visited again without notice. At that time, my husband had not yet returned home, and I was preparing for my afternoon work. The cafe was too crowded, so I came to have lunch here. I brought some friends too. Is that okay? Though her actions were unprecedented and it was difficult to keep my anger in check, Julia's friends were behind her, so I managed to send them away with a calm demeanor. I didn't ask for details, but later that evening while at work, my husband called me several times. Are you out of your mind sending hungry young people away from our home? If you were busy, you should have at least given them some money. My sister says you embarrassed her in front of her friends. It's unclear if this incident was the trigger, but I started to feel a shift in my husband's attitude afterward. We had agreed to share household chores since we both work, but he gradually began to neglect them, increasing my burden. I used to think he was mild-mannered, but it became clear that he was actually careless and fickle, often losing interest quickly in new hobbies and leaving items he had purchased for them unused. Not only in his personal room, but also on the dining table and in the car, his hobby items were scattered everywhere. I finally pointed it out, but he ignored me and took no action. I felt that his interest in me might be waning because of my nagging. Even with such disorderly behavior, Julia was the exception for my husband. The unannounced visits continue, and Julia's selfish behavior, where she eats our food and brazenly makes me suffer, doesn't stop. Initially, she secretly tormented me when my husband was not around. But lately, she has taken advantage of his indulgence and started being openly sarcastic. Julia frequently complains about the meals I prepare. This seasoning is too strong, isn't it? Are you really a pharmacist? Are you intentionally serving harmful things to make us buy your medications? You should be careful, brother. She makes malicious jokes about my profession, and my husband joins in with laughter. Furthermore, she regularly wheedles considerable amounts of money from him. I could understand if she needed money for living expenses or university textbooks, but it's clearly for her convenience when she buys birthday presents for her friends. And then she takes my husband shopping at high-end brands and lets him spend a lot of money. When I point this out, I'm countered with, I have the right to spend my own money however I like, and we can have a proper dialogue. Unbeknownst to my husband, Julia smirks behind my back, getting everything she wants while I get nothing. When I point something out, Julia quickly shows tears and dramatically seeks my husband's rescue. It's unfortunate that he is deceived by her excessive acting. I was too late to realize that my husband was overprotective. His unquestioning belief in Julia's stories and his blaming of me are laughable and enough to cool my affection for him. However, Julia will soon be a third-year university student, busy with job hunting and writing her thesis, and I won't see her as often, so I decided to be patient a little longer. I hope her challenging personality will soften after she graduates and quickly gets married. Yet, it wasn't my husband or Julia who fundamentally shook my life, but the death of my beloved grandfather. With no grandmother or parents, I inherited my grandfather's estate. While I was considering what to do with the remaining house and thought about demolishing it to preserve beautiful memories, my husband stopped me and suggested that we live together in this fine house. It was surprising that my husband, who had little contact with my grandfather during his long hospital stays, proposed maintaining this house, and at that time, I was genuinely happy. Though my grandfather is no longer here, I was able to return to this house. The excitement I had for the first time after we got married cooled down just a few months after moving. When we inspected the house before moving, we found that some minor repairs were needed, mainly in the water areas. My grandfather, who built this house when he was young, cherished it greatly, and the contractors also praised its good condition each time they visited. Although the creaking of the floors was a bit bothersome, we considered remodeling in the future when our family might grow. I gradually cleaned the rooms between work and also sorted through my grandfather's belongings. While packing up and contacting the moving company, my husband disappeared without any prior notice, and I thought he might have gone to a nearby convenience store. When it was time to leave and he hadn't returned, I called him in a panic, only to be told curtly, "Go ahead without me." Not knowing what was happening but unable to keep the movers waiting, I headed to my grandfather's house alone. I reunited with my husband only after all the belongings had been moved into the house and all the procedures with the contractors were completed. Seeing Julia standing right next to him gave me a bad feeling. That feeling became reality when my husband made an unbelievable statement. "From now on, the three of us will live here. The house is large and just the two of us would make you feel lonely. It's pitiful to leave Julia in a small apartment, and now is the perfect time for her to move. I hope you can support her job hunting." What? Why did you decide such an important matter on your own? This is my grandfather's house, so you should have discussed it with me first. It would be the same even if we had talked. The house will be livelier and Julia can focus on her studies and job hunting. Isn't that fine? It's a problem. We'll discuss the specifics later, but for now, can you please leave for today? I'm exhausted from handling the funeral and moving preparations alone for months, and just moving into this house after my grandfather's death doesn't make it the right time. But my husband shouted regardless. "How can you say such a thing? If you find living together so painful, you should be the one to leave. I was just making a suggestion with good intentions, and I didn't expect to be rebutted so arrogantly. I'd be relieved if you were gone. I will not tolerate anyone who disregards family." I was shocked not to be seen as family, but I kept my composure, realizing there was no need to seriously engage with such a ridiculous person. "So, you're saying I should leave, which implies a divorce. Is that okay with you? I'll say this now to avoid any misunderstandings later, but this house was inherited by me and it's in my name. The rights to this house are, if we divorce, there will be a division of assets. The house is also a valuable inheritance. Just because it belonged to your grandfather doesn't mean it's all yours. Things don't always go your way in this world. Even if we divorce, I am a legitimate ex-spouse and I have a right to half of it. I'll pay for your half, so please leave." Before I could respond, my husband's reply was utterly nonsensical. "Lucy, you're really strict about money, aren't you? Even though you earn your own? What does it mean that you're so greedy? You should be kinder to someone younger, lady. You might think I'm a young woman who squanders money, but girls need a lot of it. On the other hand, you wear those plain clothes every day, and with all that makeup, where are you spending your money? It's like you've completely given up on being a woman. Pitiful, isn't it?" Julia triumphantly criticized me alongside my husband. Seeing this, I completely lost any love for them and just wanted to leave the situation as quickly as possible. It's fine if we don't talk about the house rights anymore, but are you really okay with that? I've checked thoroughly, I said, but the siblings looked surprised for a moment and then started smiling again. You're trying to unsettle us and enjoy watching it, aren't you? That's appalling. Well, I appreciate your agreeing to the divorce. Here, please sign this. My husband handed me a divorce form that was already signed. It was fortunate for me, who had lost all affection, that the process was moving smoothly. Sorry, but does it bother you that I am more loved than you, Lucy? If you're considering remarriage, you might want to act a bit more feminine, they said, laughing. I sighed as I picked up the divorce papers that had fallen to the floor. Displeased with my attitude, Julia complained again. Out of the corner of my eye, I told my husband, "You're completely oblivious, aren't you? Poor thing. Your wicked sister might eventually drive you out too, so stop laughing and face it properly." Huh? What are you talking about? My husband still didn't understand, tilting his head. However, Julia, perhaps due to her youth, couldn't hide her agitation and her expression stiffened. As my husband looked confused, Julia retorted, "What are you talking about, lady? I would never do such a thing." But her nervousness seemed to affect him, and I noticed a change in his attitude. Seizing the moment, I forgot my fatigue and began to gently explain in order to turn the situation around. Actually, I overheard something at a pub near the university. On days you were infatuated with your sister and didn't come home. I was so exhausted from the paperwork and had no energy to cook, so I refreshed myself by dining out with friends. Saying that, I took out my smartphone on the spot and played an audio file I had recorded one day. My brother's wife's grandfather passed away, so that house will soon be ours. His old wife is a bit of a nuisance, but since my brother is on my side, it's fine. He listens to everything I say. I once helped my brother who was being bullied by my male friend, and since then, it's always been like this. Isn't it funny? Well, he has money, so I'm planning to use him cleverly to get that house. It'll be great not to have to pay rent, and the room is spacious. I'll live there with my boyfriend. Once I get the house, I'll slowly pull money from my brother and eventually drive him out. I think it's no problem. If my brother brings up divorce because of the house, that old wife will definitely panic. Fortunately, the pub was noisy, but where I was sitting was perfect for recording clearly. I started recording because I first heard them bad-mouthing not only me but also my husband. But as she and her boyfriend got more drunk, their terrible plan became apparent. I decided not to tell my husband about this information right away but to watch his reaction first. However, sadly, my husband, persuaded by his sister, readily brought up divorce, which I accepted. When I returned from the restroom, I confirmed that the main speaker had been Julia. As my husband looked at Julia, his face turned pale with fear and his voice trembled. Julia looked down for a while but suddenly looked up and retorted fiercely, blushing. "This is a fabrication. There's no way we'd coincidentally be in the same restaurant. You don't even know my boyfriend, and it's creepy how you're making conclusions just from seeing him a little. Even if it was really me, wiretapping is a problem. Play detective on your own and don't involve others." I then played the recording I had stopped again. The sound of heavy boots, staggering towards the restroom, was recorded. Right after that, a man was recorded talking on the phone with a woman. He spoke in a cloying voice, calling Julia an ADM and talking about his intention to get the house from her. The man boasted that he could get any gift from Julia if he begged, and he said he was also getting money from her because he wasn't working. It was revealed that Julia had previously given the luxury brands she received from her brother to her new boyfriend, and she was also paying him with the money she earned from her part-time job. When I first heard this, I sympathized with Julia being played, but now the situation had completely changed. She was advancing a dishonest plan behind the scenes, and my grandfather's house was nearly caught up in that scheme. I felt that she deserved to face the consequences of her actions. After the recording ended, I watched Julia's reaction. Her face already showed signs of confusion and shock, sinking into a state of complete bewilderment. From this scene, my husband must have undoubtedly realized that Julia was the woman talking to the man and was forced to accept the truth. That is all the truth I needed to share, and there is nothing more to say. As I was about to leave, my husband suddenly grabbed my hand, his eyes burning with fervor. "Wait a minute, Lucy, you know it too, right? I was just deceived. Let's reconsider the divorce. As promised, let's be happy together." However, I calmly responded, "No, there is no need to retract. I also desire divorce. Besides, isn't your dear sister crying? You should take care of her." Leaving those words behind, I briefly flashed my husband a refreshing smile, took my essential belongings, and left the scene immediately. I promptly submitted the divorce papers, and the divorce was successfully finalized. I was looking forward to enjoying single life, but the actual situation was more complex than anticipated, and things were not simple. My ex-husband continued to squat in my grandfather's house, showing no intention of moving. To avoid direct interactions as much as possible, I involved a lawyer. The lawyer repeatedly explained that the inheritance is not subject to property division, but my ex-husband exploded in anger at the law itself, shouting, "What about my rights then? How can a husband have no rights?" And the discussion made no progress. To resolve this issue, I frequently contacted and consulted with my in-laws. They responded swiftly, scolding both my ex-husband and his sister harshly at my grandfather's house and the sister's apartment, making the malicious siblings tremble. My father-in-law is very intimidating when angry, and later, my mother-in-law relayed this story to me with laughter. This explained why my ex-husband stopped visiting his parents' home. Even after the divorce was finalized, my in-laws deeply apologized to me, but I clearly explained that I was not contacting them to seek apologies. My intention was simply to settle matters and start a new life. I told my mother-in-law not to inform my ex-husband that I had changed my contact information, then quietly ended the call. I believe my ex-husband's persistent pursuit of the inheritance is probably due to a lack of savings. Despite my suggestion to open a new bank account for joint savings at the beginning of our marriage, he stubbornly refused. The reason was that he was spending substantial amounts on student loans, mobile phone bills, hobbies, and financial support for his sister, and he claimed he could not afford to save. Ultimately, we agreed to save individually, but as I am actively involved in investment activities, I do not have much cash on hand, and I do not have the means to give him a substantial share. Furthermore, I have conveyed through my lawyer that I will not claim dividing any property. Since my ex-husband signed the contract under the overwhelming intimidation of my father-in-law, it is necessary to ensure that he strictly adheres to this agreement. Ultimately, my ex-husband, who had been squatting in the house I inherited from my grandfather, and his sister, who recklessly spent her money, had to return to their parents' home. My unemployed ex-husband and his sister, who dropped out of college, have taken low-level jobs at a company run by relatives, enduring days of intense physical labor. Under strict supervision, they are being retrained both mentally and physically, laboring in tears each day. During this time, my mother-in-law sent a photo showing how the long hours of work have changed my ex-husband's physique, turning his bare belly into a toned one, but this sparked no emotion in my heart. As for my sister-in-law, she initially tried to use her youth and attractiveness to get close to her boss. But since the president is a relative, her plans utterly failed. Now, having removed all her glamorous nails, she is engaged in agricultural work, experiencing fulfilling labor. Meanwhile, I spend tranquil days in my grandfather's nature-filled house, mourning his death but able to immerse myself in memories by looking through the albums I've organized. In this warm and peaceful home, I plan to host small parties for close friends in the future. This is my small joy and the step towards my new daily life.